This week's episode of the Cloudcast is brought to you by Intel Cloud for All, driving the creation of thousands of clouds.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from DockerCon here in Barcelona. First of all, a huge thanks to the Docker folks for having us here as a media sponsor for the show. We just got out of the keynote, and I have Ilan Rabinovich, Technical Community and Evangelism at Datadog. How you doing, man?
Doing well. Thanks for having us here.
So let's just kind of jump right in. We just finished the keynotes. What's your thoughts on the keynote, on Docker, on the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's clear that both Docker and the Docker community are seeing quite a bit of growth here. The room was packed, of course, and we got to see some of the numbers from the the Datadog Docker adoption study.
Yes.
During the keynote, which I think was exciting for everybody there. It's growing like crazy. I think the other theme that I noticed both during the keynote as well as wandering the expo floor is folks are quite focused on security this year. We have CoreOS having released Claire earlier this week. The Docker folks talking about Nautilus and their integration with Docker Hub and how they're now scanning containers for vulnerabilities as folks are pulling and pushing them.
Yeah, and actually, the one thing I find interesting about that is so you have to go check out Project Nautilus. They kind of soft launched it, if you will, and it was actually around there for like 2 months now, and they've actually scanned I forget how many millions of containers. Yeah. I was like, wow, okay, that's actually really cool.
And I think that's something that we've all sort of at least on the on the more operations and security focused side of this DevOps conversation has always been containers are great. I'm glad that they're simplifying my deployment patterns, but what do I do when I now have to patch Heartbleed across across 20 different containers that make up my app stack?
Right.
How do I know where those are and what have you? And it seems like there's an increasing number of tools now this year to do that. The Bitnami folks are have their own spin on it. The CoreOS folks and the Docker folks seem to be building scanners for containers. I'm looking forward to seeing. They said they're at some point going to make that self-service. So I'm looking forward to seeing once you can run that on your own containers rather than just on the containers being pulled and pushed to Docker Hub.
Yep, completely agree. And it's a fantastic first step, and really looking forward to the next logical step. But that does kind of lead us into. So there was a post that Datadog did called 8 Surprising Facts About Real Docker Adoption, and actually some of the stats were used in the keynote today by Ben. That was really cool. It's gotten a lot of attention, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes. The reason why I think it got so much attention is, well, first of all, it was a secondary source because, Docker can say, millions of this and millions of that, and everyone kind of goes, oh, okay, great. Yeah. But but you guys are able to really pull it from real customers that you're monitoring.
Yeah, so there's a couple interesting things about that data. Folks are pointing Datadog at this, and Datadog, for those that aren't aware, is a hosted infrastructure and application monitoring platform. So that means this is not just hobbyists at home or developers on their laptops running this, but rather they're using Datadog as a paid service to monitor these containers. So a lot of those stats are from folks' production or development environments in serious organizations. And it's I think some of the facts there were kind of some of them were what we expected, but a lot of them were actually surprising. I know the title sounds a little clickbaity, but that's there's some serious meat there around. I was when I think about newer technologies, whether they be Docker or something else that I might be reading on a given day, my initial assumption is usually that it's smaller organizations or at least younger organizations that are adopting it right away.
Yep.
And one of the facts there that was quite surprising to me is it seemed like the larger organizations were the ones that were adopting Docker most. And I guess I can come up with my own theories as to why, but that was quite exciting to me to see that I chat with folks here, whether it's at DockerCon or other events, and we're running into banks that are using Docker. We're running into organizations that are usually the types of organizations that when they're the epitome of the word enterprise.
Without a doubt. And so the idea of the larger enterprises or companies really are the early adopters was super surprising to me. And the other one was stickiness.
Yeah.
The what was it, like 2/3 of the companies that try Docker end up adopting it.
Yeah.
I found that really fascinating. I guess it probably goes to that again, why the larger companies. The larger companies, in my mind, it's probably because they have the biggest problems.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you have
problems at scale, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a large, if you have a large organization, you likely have a ton of different applications, and those applications have varying dependencies that make the deployment of your application painful. Likely differing versions of libraries and tool sets and what have you. And so this idea of the single binary, that's exactly what they need. And you look back at to look at a different set of container technology, going back to the J2EE days in Java. I mean, this is kind of what we all claimed the big ear was going to solve for us. The ears and wars were going to solve for us in our Java web apps, and it turns out that they didn't all that well. But it looks like a new form of containers are going to jump in and do that for us.
Yes, without a doubt. The write once,
run anywhere
might actually happen, right? So let's actually move on then a little bit into Docker itself, and there's a series of posts that Datadog put up recently, and I'll put links to the show notes in there. Because it was really fascinating to me, because I never really probably sat down and thought about it, but monitoring a quote-unquote container is actually difficult. Is that a correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this isn't so much about it being a container, but rather about the level of dynamicism that you see in most container-based environments. They lend themselves. The fact that they're so easy to spin up and spin down means that they lend themselves to environments that change quite frequently. And going back to the study we were talking about earlier, we were seeing that on average, folks are running about 4 to 6 containers on any given host, and that those containers, each of those containers lives about a quarter of the lifetime of a given host. Yeah. So a lot of the challenges that you might have run into in the cloud, if you were using the cloud and all of its elasticity with auto scaling or what have you, are now you're now exacerbating it by 4 to 16 times the number of pieces that are changing at any given moment. And so that's where a lot of the monitoring challenge comes from. A lot of folks, as they moved into the cloud, sort of some organizations went and adopted it all the way. They went for the auto scaling, they went for the service discovery and microservices, and all the exciting things that make that made the cloud be something that one wanted to sell. But you also had a lot of organizations that just said, I don't need a data center anymore. I don't need to worry about metal. Let me just pick up my legacy monolithic app and drop it exactly as it was into the cloud. And so for those organizations, the monitoring challenges of the cloud maybe didn't hit them right away. There was a way to make your static environment mostly play nice in the cloud environment. As we start to work with containers and just the lifetimes of them being so much shorter than VMs or servers, what we're finding is that level of change is really the challenging part of monitoring containers. Yeah. I mean, there's the technical bits of how do you get the stats out of the Docker container rather than the stats of the host that of the top level host. But I think that pales in comparison to trying to monitor trying to monitor the container landscape in your organization with the tools that you might have used to monitor servers. The analogy we like to use is, if you look at the Ptolemaic sort of model of the universe versus the Copernicus model of the universe, I realize that might be a little esoteric here, but you see these, if you look at those images, and you'll see those in some of these posts that we put up on monitoring, you see all these really crazy squiggly lines as we try to make the world revolve around, the universe revolve around Earth. Or the solar system specifically.
Yes.
Whereas all of a sudden, if we change that model around a little bit and we have the Earth and all other planets rotate around the sun, all of a sudden there are these very clear lines, and it's a very similar analogy to the monitoring problem around containers. if we try to take host-level monitoring, whether it be Nagios, and I love Nagios, it's something I ran for many decades and built many tools on top of, but you try to take those tools and you point them at an environment where things are constantly changing, they're looking at the host rather than looking at the service or the application.
Right. Yeah, and as part of that post, it actually had this almost like Twilight Zone area of, okay, we used to monitor the host and we used to monitor the applications, but there's that
piece in the middle
now that it's like, all right, we had to go figure out how to go do this now.
Yeah, and so a lot of that comes down to just changing the way we monitor things. So rather than worrying about individual servers and say, let's monitor server A and we'll treat it like this special thing that we have affinity towards or care for. And I mean, I know that they've had sort of this pets versus cattle analogy for many years in large deployments or infrastructure, but it's that much more in this level where in this world where things are changing all of the time. Rather than doing that, we ask ourselves not how is Apache or how is Nginx running on this particular host or is port 80 open, but rather turn it into broader questions where we use the tags that are coming out of our infrastructure as a service providers like EC2 or Azure or GCE, and out of our containers themselves, our containers with Docker, or even our schedulers with things like Kubernetes or Mesos, and start to use those to craft questions. So we say, rather than asking about individual hosts, we might say, how many errors is our web app returning in US East 1 running version 2 of the application?
Mm-hmm.
And you come back with these queries that, these questions that don't change based on how many containers or how many hosts you're running on a given day, but rather, these are business metrics that are important to you, and they will always ring true, regardless of how far you scale up or down on any point in time.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So, one final question, just because I'm curious about this one. So, another stat going back to the 8 surprising facts. The number of containers per host of being a 4-to-1 ratio, I actually thought it was going to be higher.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that one? Why isn't that number higher?
So it was higher in some cases. I mean, that just happened to be the average. But if you look at organizations where they were using it for build farms, or organizations where they were using it as part of some sort of a pipeline, the containers were spinning up and down much more frequently, and there were many more of them running at a given time. I think it's. That was one that was surprising to me as well, and I don't know that I have all the data on it just yet. I mean, these are numbers we're continuing to investigate and dive into and speak with our customers about, as well as speak with folks here at DockerCon on. And I'm looking forward to seeing the next round of data. Yeah,
and me personally, I in my head I immediately wonder, is that just a comfort level thing, because it's still emerging technology and everyone's still trying to figure out how hard they really want to push it? Yeah,
I think, there's probably a bit of that. I think a lot of folks are still figuring out how to manage their containers. I mean, we saw Swarm reaching new and interesting heights of scale today during the keynote. They were running well over 50,000 nodes, 50,000 containers across their cluster. We're seeing, KubeCon, at KubeCon earlier this week, they released Kubernetes 1.1. There's lots of these tools around there that are coming out now to make the management of containers easier, not just the security bits they were talking earlier, but rather the managing of the resources behind it and scheduling where those containers end up. I think it'll be interesting as those evolve, how many more, if that changes the density or how people interact with containers.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, we're out of time. Ilan, where can everyone find out more about you or Datadog or what you guys have going on?
Sure. So Datadog, check out our website or our blog, datadoghq.com. So we have the Docker adoption study up there, as well as a 4-part piece on how to monitor Docker and containers in general. You can find me on Twitter, Rabinovich, and I imagine that'll end up in the show notes somewhere.
Absolutely.
Looking forward to seeing you guys here, either at DockerCon or elsewhere, and chatting more about containers and monitoring in general.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you for your time, and thanks everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.